So welcome everybody. This is a terrific and new venue for RocGrowth, and today we have what I think is a very special event or a very special program, because I think oftentimes when people think about the words innovation and higher education, what comes to mind is maybe some professor or some grad student with some long beard doing something that hopefully becomes something. But in reality, innovation has a different role in universities, because just like every other industry, just like other organizations of all sorts, universities themselves have also been innovating internally, both in terms of the sorts of experiences that they now want to provide educationally for their students, as well as the ways that they go about actually creating individuals that are more innovative and self-directed and entrepreneurial. And today we have the pleasure of having the two individuals who in this community really lead those sorts of efforts. First we have Julia Maddox, who is the director of the iZone program at the University of Rochester. And we also have Jim Hall, who is Dean of University Studies here at RIT, where we are today. And he also oversees the School of Individualized Study. So welcome both, and perhaps we can start off. Julia, can you tell us a little bit about what is iZone?
So the Barbara J. Berger iZone at the University of Rochester Libraries is indeed a program. It is also a space and a community and a service to help students learn to be the creative problem solvers that we were all born to be, but that over the course of our education, we somehow learn to not think of ourselves as empowered, as allowed to be that type of innovator, that creator. We think of that person as someone who has special permission, who is quirky, who is offbeat, who is out of the box, who might have a particular job title, who might be going into entrepreneurship or to business or even product innovation. But at iZone, we believe that all of us are born with the power to solve the problems that keep us up at night. And our job at iZone is not to tell students how to be problem solvers, but to teach them the tools to do it, to teach them the tools to go out into their lives, into their careers, find and identify challenging problems that they may confront, whether that's helping a student figure out a path to solving problems related to gender-based violence in Zambia, or whether that's helping a student figure out how to solve the problem of women's clothing never having enough pockets. Women, can I get an amen, right? Not enough, thank you, absolutely. There's no problem too big or too small for iZone. We are not here to judge the worthiness of a challenge. We're here to help students go out into their lives and their careers feeling that they can tackle those challenges, that they can be a creative force to be reckoned with. And it's an absolute pleasure to get to work with those students and those creative minds, whether they're in engineering, whether they're English majors, whether they're undeclared. And we have a lot of fun at iZone. We get into a lot of trouble. We break a lot of rules. So always feel free to come and play around with us, for sure.
So maybe Jim.
Yeah, Jim.
The core of what I do, overseeing the School of Individualized Study, is help students design customized pathways at the associate's level, at the bachelor's level, and at the master's level. And we're actually looking into doing this at the doctoral level now as well. So in some sense, it's a kind of supply chain problem. It's about me finding ways to match up individuals who have an interest in a particular kind of content and getting them access to it. But in other ways, it's really about engaging young people and young at heart people to believe that they can shape the kinds of educational opportunities that they want for themselves. We attract people who are of distinctive entrepreneurial mindset, who think about themselves as their very first product in a lot of cases. And we attract people who simply are sniffing out what is ultimately a new product area. They've got an idea about how the curriculum at the institution can be combined in new and distinctive ways. And oftentimes there are our best markers of where the future is going to be. A lot of what we also try to do is really just try to enhance the institution's innovation brand. We're trying to get the messaging out there that we're the kind of place that you can come to and do what you need to do. For a long time, RIT has been the Toyota Corolla of university brands. It's common sense and reliable, and you know there's going to be a positive outcome. So in some ways, we're trying to let people know there's some Celicas hidden on the lot too, and places to do things a little differently.
I wonder what UR is.
So maybe starting off with kind of more of a macro question. So thinking about this idea about how universities these days are changing their curriculums, what do you see maybe as sort of the future of higher education in terms of how important it will be for these sorts of more individualized programs to exist and thrive, for the university itself to be able to kind of compete against other universities?
Oh, great, an easy one. So this is a really fascinating conversation, and it's one that I think a lot of people working in higher education are indeed having right now. We're trying to figure out how to launch students into careers that we don't know how those look yet. We don't know what job titles exist, let alone 20 years from now, 10 years from now, maybe even 5 years from now. The jobs that our students enter into the workforce prepared to do may disappear within 5 years. How do we prepare them to be resilient? How do we prepare them to be adaptable, creative? How do we prepare them to be lifelong learners? And a lot of what we do at iZone and what we get to collaborate with some of our partners with, including those at the Career Center and in a lot of different academic departments, a lot of what we do is figure out how to build those mindsets and behaviors. Beyond the actual subject matter expertise that we're teaching students, how can we help them learn to work in diverse teams with people who may have entirely different life experiences and skill sets and backgrounds? How can we prepare them to seek out new information, new learning, new credentials that will allow them to go off and forge a brand new path for themselves when they find their careers thrown a curveball? And a lot of what we do at iZone is using a methodology called design thinking or human-centered design, which I think a lot of people here have used before. But it's really about understanding the nature of a challenge that you are confronting from the perspective of real people, whether that's someone that you're solving a problem for, or whether you're addressing a problem in your own life. And it's about slowing down to understand, what are we trying to accomplish? What is the outcome we're trying to achieve? What are we trying to make happen? What problem are we trying to solve before we even start to think about innovative, creative solutions? And every mindset and tool that we teach within that methodology is perfectly equipped to help students navigate that future of work, as we like to call it in higher ed, where we don't know exactly when and how the robots will steal our jobs, but we know they're going to. And how can we prepare our students to work in harmony with those robots rather than resist the inevitable? So I definitely think when we're talking about the future of higher education and how we prepare not just our students, but ourselves and our pedagogical approach to be adaptable, to be resilient against these forces of nature that are going to happen whether we're ready or not. And the more that we can all train ourselves to think big, open-minded, to really understand the ecosystem in which we're operating and learn how to be empowered players within it rather than passive bystanders, first of all, the more higher education is likely to survive, but also the more our students are likely to thrive as we send them out into their careers.
We joked beforehand that I was going to say that whatever she said, I would then say what she said, and I will say that. I think we're talking about an 800-year-old industry in higher education, which is certainly ripe for disruption. We're all trying to manage the meaning of digital transformation. I absolutely do believe in all of the kind of mindset questions that Julia was pointing to. But let me highlight a couple of big structural questions I think that we find ourselves in the midst of. One is that we're in the content delivery business, and I've been trying to think through the analogy a lot over the last couple of years of our relationship to how we're like what the media industry was like in the mid-1990s. Journalism, publishing, music, all of which obviously no longer look like what they looked like in the early 1990s. We're in the same kind of danger in that, as I say to my students all the time, that content is around you everywhere. It's cheap, ubiquitous, and often free. And so you need to be evaluating constantly the value proposition that the university puts in front of you, because there's other ways to learn things. The other, I would say the cost puzzle that universities are trying to sort out right now is the relationship between time and learning. And this also has been dramatically impacted by the larger digital transformation. We've been in the midst of a model that's lasted about 150 years built around the credit hours, the primary unit of organizing learning. And it's been fabulous in terms of measuring how we mark faculty workloads, how we mark how much time students will spend with us. But a kind of obvious insight that institutions have come to, and to a certain extent families have come to, is that not everybody learns at the same pace. Not everybody comes to the table at the same place. And yet, regardless, we ask students to sit through these 15-week structures called semesters, or 8-week structures called quarters. And in exchange, they get a marker of credit that they can bank towards a credential. Employers don't get a heck of a lot out of that at all. What we like to say is that time is fixed in the current system and learning is variable. And the puzzle we're all trying to figure out is how to flip that relationship such that learning is fixed and time is variable. If you can learn what you need to learn in a particular content area in 3 weeks, why do we make you sit around 15 weeks? Why can't you move on to the next item? So right now we are working primarily at thinking how to redefine credentials with that basic economic insight in play, but also not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Some advocates for rapid higher ed disruption, it seems to me, have been all too quick to discard an 800-year-old industry. There's a lot that can be done in an intimate relationship between a faculty member and a student. The best of what we do is still guide, mentor, coach, tutor, teach, and it really makes the disruption puzzle a tricky one.
So I have a daughter who's a sophomore, so we've already started talking a little bit about college. And I have to say that after I kind of spoke to each of you in preparation for today, I got really excited for her in a way that I really hadn't thought about before, because for me, I find it absolutely fascinating the way that both of these programs really force you or encourage you to kind of go and sort of seek beyond the curriculum of each class and also beyond just what's happening at the kind of within the confines of the university campus, in some cases where you're traveling to other campuses to do things. Can you talk maybe a little bit about what are some of the examples of maybe some of the most interesting ways in which people have been able to, some of the students that are in these programs have been able to kind of reach beyond the campus, and maybe also things that you see as likely happening in the next 5 or 10 years in terms of how that kind of much broader and more flexible approach with experiential learning, how these things will really change in the coming years for, well, I guess, people like my daughter.
Great, thanks. So, I think one of the best parts of our mission at iZone is our extraordinarily democratic approach to innovation. We do everything we possibly can to lower the barrier to entry for students who want to get started on an idea. We are there, we like to say we have the yes and spirit at iZone. When you first come to us with an idea or a problem you want to solve, you're vulnerable, you're scared. You don't want to share your most creative, personal ideas and inspirations with somebody that you may not know at all. So our job is first and foremost not to take the wind out of their sails, but to encourage them and to help them figure out a path forward. We, as I like to say, and my students hate when I say this, we are idea midwives. So our job, we're not having the baby, we're just helping you deliver it. And we are experts in nothing but the process and here to help facilitate and coach no matter what those ideas are. So one of the great benefits of that is the huge variety and diversity of ideas that students want support with. And it could be anything, again, to my favorite pocket idea, to a very ambitious community project, to launching their own curriculum, to exploring pedagogical approaches. We have 3 undergraduate students we're supporting right now who are interviewing faculty about how to change the entire approach of our university towards teaching and learning in the classroom setting. A bit ambitious, but that's the type of aspirations these students have. And our job, again, is to encourage and support all of those. We are lucky that because of our bias to action that we have and our quick iterative approach, we get to see a lot of successes happen quickly. For example, we have a student that in January, they came and pitched at our early idea pitch event. It's like Shark Tank, but kinder and gentler, like Panda Tank. And that student pitched their idea for a coffee roaster. It's a student from the Dominican Republic who wanted to bring coffee roasting here. They have now launched that in the course of less than a semester. It's available for sale on our campus and online. And we're not here to overplan, to overthink. We're here to help encourage, support, and help students have that bias to action that gets them started. So while we're still in our early phases and just starting to see traction, we opened our doors in September. I think there's no end to where we'll see students take that mindset of fast, furious, ambitious, and optimistic approach to innovation that we're encouraging.
Sky's the limit. I mean, we're trying to get the messaging out there to young people that the best thing they can do for themselves is learn how to articulate for us what it is they would like to do in the world, so we can help them plot it out a bit. We are deeply connected to other institutional ecosystems in terms of our startup and entrepreneurship community, our Center for Leadership and Civic Engagement. So each of those kinds of programmatic efforts themselves can lead to opportunities for students, whether it's starting a social impact venture, whether it's starting a new company. I had the great pleasure of talking with some coaches here in the room that are working with my students. Some of what we work with is helping students move away from their own previous expectations of what education looks like and how it's designed. They can do things on their own. They can do things that don't necessarily involve one faculty member at the front of the room. I was telling Julia's husband about this remarkable neurocomputing initiative that we have going on campus right now. This was started by a student, now involves 35 students on campus. They are building neurocomputing devices with some faculty supervision, but the courses have been structured by them. The lab has been structured. The outreach, they're better than any of us in terms of marketing and getting the word out. I don't want to give too many specific examples, because when I start doing, I get teary up about the good things that folks are doing in the world. But my flip response was going to be that one of the key things that this new model potentially produces is happiness. What I see is that when students come through our door that have gone through oftentimes not just rigid K-12 education, but high-pressure K-12 education, that just giving them the space to step back and think about, my first question for all my students is, when are you happy? What makes you happy? And inevitably they will tell me something that's wholly out of line with the way in which they've been studying the number of years they've been here at RIT. And by simply saying to them, you have the opportunity here to explore. It's a crazy old idea, but curiosity will serve you well in the long run. So it's so many good things. I mean, viable, job-producing ventures we see come out of this model, but we also just see students who find purpose. We see students who find vocation. There's an old word that's kind of nice to see come back into style in some ways. And sometimes we help students along paths that actually do end in failure of one kind or another, but if they hadn't worked it out, and if they hadn't worked it out with the kinds of skillful adult guidance that we can give them, it would be a kind of open wound for them the rest of their lives. So I'm excited for your daughter too.
What is the approximate percentage of students that your kind of individualized programs currently touch, or where a good portion of what they're doing involves, for instance, these individualized programs? And do you see, I know both of you see this kind of as what you're doing as part of the growth at universities. It's a growing trend. But do you see some tipping point where perhaps at some point the majority, if not the vast majority of students actually end up kind of developing their own individualized path toward pursuing ideas or pursuing their own degrees?
We certainly hope so. Part of how we define our ultimate vision for iZone's success is by impacting not just the students that we work with directly, but the broader culture around problem solving and creativity at the university. And we do not need to be in the room for all of that great work to happen. In fact, we love it when we find out that a tool we have taught or a method we've brought to the campus is being used without our knowledge whatsoever. And so for us to measure impact, we have plenty of great KPIs, metrics for understanding how we're succeeding on a year-to-year basis. And we're lucky that in terms of diversity of the students that we work with, it's highly diverse. We have students from all majors and from many different life aspirational points who come to us for support. And we do have a reputation and brand at this point as being available to students for anything, not just for business. We kind of carried that brand with us in the beginning. Oh, it's an entrepreneurship center. And we're like, no, we have a great entrepreneurship center. That's not this. This is here to help students understand that their ability to make a difference in their own path through education and life is stronger. It's more direct and powerful than they thought before. So for us to measure our impact in the long term, we see it as shifting the culture of the university, and for more of our educators and staff and faculty and fellow students to have the tools and the mindsets to coach and develop and to support those conversations. And a lot of them are things like failure, embracing failure, learning from it, benefiting from it. One of our favorite programs at iZone is actually called Screw Up Nights, and it's where we all get together in a fun, festive, open mic type environment, and deans, trustees, alums, students, faculty, we all get together and tell our stories of epic rejection, embarrassment, mistakes, screw-ups. It's a lot of fun. And we, through programs like that, we are trying to shift the conversation about how experimentation, curiosity, creativity is managed on our campus. So we certainly do see that as our ultimate goal, is a more cultural shift at the university.
A couple different ways to answer that, and maybe you can follow up based on the dramatically different ways to do it. On the one hand, I think we actually try to cycle the message that this is kind of a niche avant-garde activity because it makes it hip and makes people want to come through the door. The reality is that we are the 5th largest major, or non-major as it is, at RIT. Some of that is not always people coming through the front door and making it a conscious choice. One of the ways in which students use the flexibility that we deliver is transfer students that come into the institution and do not want to lose credit, students who have changed course midstream, don't want to start over at the beginning of a flow chart, will bring stuff to us, and we work with them as best we can. So we are both simultaneously marginal and at the center of activity on campus. There's also a really interesting structural question here, which has to do with the ways in which I think institutions around the country are thinking about open pathways. In the last 6 months, and this is a major economic issue for this region, in the last 6 months there have been at least 6 colleges close in the Northeast. We have a demographic challenge facing us. We have a cliff coming in 2026 with a drop-off of 18-year-olds in Western New York. And some small institutions are going to go through really hard times. I know that some of those small institutions are wondering about whether or not they can rebrand themselves as open curriculum institutions and walk away from hard to staff, hard to manage, hard to maintain, hard to sustain, endless menus of majors. We're also seeing other forward-looking institutions begin to wonder whether or not the disciplinary organization of knowledge that worked well in the 19th century is necessarily the way to get at our toughest problems in the 21st century. And so you have places like Olin College in Boston, you have Quest University up in British Columbia, that have organized themselves around problems to be solved. And it's been less about cordoning off disciplinary knowledge in a specific way and more about how do you get the right people in the room to solve a problem.
So this, by the way, will be the last question, then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So each of you have now spent time watching students who are doing some form of entrepreneurial activity, whether it's social entrepreneurship or more traditional. What have been each of your observations about, and you mentioned things like the failure type sessions, but what have been your observations about what sorts of environments, experiences, things like that have yielded the best results in terms of people really kind of learning the things that we all think that people need to learn in order to be successful entrepreneurs after college?
Absolutely, and for the sake of my answer, I'll define entrepreneurship as a mindset, as the ability to go out and tackle the problems that you find in your life. So we do a lot of thinking about how to set the stage for successful entrepreneurship and innovation and problem solving in every environment that we create, whether it's a classroom, whether it's a large workshop, whether it's a small session with just a few people or a big one with 80 people. So we think about how to create the environment. We think about the artifacts. We think about the culture that we're going to build for that moment in time around these people and how we're going to create that experience. Because what we have learned, both from studying and from visiting other centers, and also from our first-hand experience ourselves, is that it is extremely important how you think about that stage that you're setting. And things like creating a playful environment, an environment where signals are sent to people that they don't have to take themselves quite so seriously in this space, that we're temporarily suspending the laws that you live by every day of the week otherwise. No, this is a place where you're allowed to mess up, you're allowed to fail, you're allowed to be ridiculous. And in fact, you have to be, because we believe that we're not gonna stumble on those fantastic aha moments if we don't first let out some true duds. And in fact, it's when you let those duds escape your lips, and maybe they're violating a law of the universe, a law of physics, but it accesses a part of your brain that gives you permission to come up with ideas that are just so crazy they might work. So we do think a lot about how do we set that playful environment, that yes and environment, and how are we responding to students when they are the most vulnerable, when they are allowing us a peek into their brains and into their aspirations and their hopes and dreams. And everything we do around design thinking, again, is based in empathy, and it's based in being vulnerable with one another. And that vulnerability that allows a team of very diverse people from perhaps very different backgrounds or value systems, that allows them to connect and to find their shared human identity, and together capitalize on that diversity, capitalize on the fact that they disagree with one another, and have that collision of different personalities and viewpoints, have it be the asset of your team, have it be what allows you to come up with things that a bunch of engineers or a bunch of English majors sitting in a room together wouldn't come up with. So absolutely thinking about that environment, thinking about creating that suspension of reality where play and fun and almost childlike behavior for some purposes in time, where that is allowed and encouraged and in fact necessary. But we definitely, we consider iZone always a prototype. It's always a work in progress. We'll never be done with iZone. After all, we got to drink the Kool-Aid and practice what we preach. So we're always looking for new methods, new mindsets, new tools. We're always experimenting, always finding new rules to break. And sometimes that involves going off of research that we found around how people innovate within a team, how they create, how they allow themselves to find exciting pathways that they didn't know existed. And sometimes it's about just going on our own hunches and instincts and trying things out that may seem counterintuitive even to ourselves. So we'll always continue to do that. We'll always continue to break rules, but it's definitely one of the best parts of thinking about these experiences.
Yes, do all that improvisation, and I think we do much the same kind of work. I would highlight that I've certainly learned in the years that I've been now at RIT, which have been more entrepreneurship intensive than my previous gig, which was also in the same individuation space but had more of a liberal arts bent. The key thing I've learned is one size does not fit all. There are some students who the best thing I can do for them is get the hell out of their way. I introduce them to people in this community and especially moved by this community's generosity to speak to young people and coach and mentor them along the way. And then there are other folks that need a more systematic entrepreneurship education, and sometimes we have to slow them down and try to get them to learn their vocabulary and learn what it is they need to do in preparatory fashion. The other thing I would highlight, though, is I think a key insight has been that we are not an incubator, we are not an accelerator environment. We have access to some spaces like that. I had to engage a prominent entrepreneur in this community who said to me, how come you people waste so much time with lousy ideas? And I had to say, well, those lousy ideas come from people we think of as customers who pay us money and expect us to participate in the process of educating them. And that's been really important too, to realize that there is some interesting distribution of roles in this community. And I think the fun stuff over the next couple of years is going to be figuring out the relationship between what Julia does and what I do and what you folks do, and figuring out how we can best allocate our resources to really get the most bang for the buck in this community.
Well, thank you both for running these really critical programs that are building and helping to incubate kind of the next set of creative thinkers and entrepreneurs in this community. Can we please give a round of applause?